This is Anne-Marie Leake, Vice President of Communications for ePay Resources. Welcome to the Payment Space.
I'm pleased to welcome Caroline Cypriano, co-founder and COO at JJ4Tech, to the Payment Space podcast, brought to you by ePay Resources. This is being recorded live at Nacha's Smarter, Faster Payments 2024. I'm your guest host, Peter Davey, the Payments Jedi. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm so happy to be here today.
So one of the things that we recently chatted about at the Faster Payments Council was some of the trends that are happening in Brazil. And Pix obviously being a pretty huge opportunity for Brazil, being launched in almost the midst of the pandemic. It's taken off like wildfire, probably one of the most successful payment systems that we've seen in the recent past. So talk a little bit about some of the experiences that you've had with that payment system, and we'll then talk a little bit about how that can translate into the U.S.
Awesome. Well, I'm always really excited to talk about Pix because Pix really changed how payments work in Brazil. The Brazilian economy, just like the U.S. is right now, used to be heavily reliant on cash. And that was a big problem when it comes to logistics, right, to bring money from one side to the other, and also like the safety of like carrying cash around. So there's a whole lot of like efficiency that you can bring into everyday life if you can pay for stuff electronically. And differently from the US, where like Venmo already existed even before FedNow, in Brazil, there wasn't this like big spread out solution for P2P. So when Pix came out, which was in November 2020, this was an immense change for people because they wouldn't even have an option for P2P. So some private solutions existed. So PayPal was already a thing in Brazil, and also there was a private solution called PicPay, but it definitely wasn't spread out as Venmo is in the United States. So to start off, like if we analyze like data on 2023, we're going to see that 60% of Pix transactions were represented by P2P. But that's definitely not the only use case, even though that was a big thing when it came out. The amazing part of Pix is that it can be used for like mostly any use case. Like you can pay for public transportation, you can pay for a bill, you can pay for like government taxes, utilities, right? So there's a whole wide range of use cases. You can just sit at a restaurant and pay for your food, and a big use case is also e-commerce. So anyways, like mostly everything that you do now you can use Pix for. And a crazy thing is, when it first came out, when people started talking about Pix, I swear I thought it was going to be a failure. And I thought so because, come on, like there used to be a high percentage before Pix was implemented. About 30% of the population was unbanked. So you're talking about like a country that, you know, has a lot of like low income people, and lots of the people over there don't have smartphones, they have feature phones. So in an economy like that, would you expect like a digital payment service to take off? I'd say that if I had to bet, I would bet more like on the United States at first than on Brazil, you know? But in the end of the day, what happened is, as soon as it came out, its efficiency and ease of use, and also how like it was marketed out there, and people could actually like know that it existed and how it was used. So the educational part was essential. Then people just started using it for everything. So literally like everything. You can donate to a church, you know, like using a Pix QR code. So anyways, I think that is definitely a big change. Like if we look at 2022, that impacted directly the usage of cash. Like it dropped 7.7, and I think that number raised recently. There were other forms of transferring money called DOC and TED, which are kind of comparable to a wire transfer or even ACH. And those methods were replaced by Pix. And if you ask like, okay, and how about checks? Okay, so checks were long gone before Pix was implemented, you know, so there was a huge impact on everyone's lives. And now it's really like part of the economy. And a really important thing, and you asked about the United States, right? Like how do we translate that to the United States? And every time we talk about Pix here, the first thing we hear is, if you know anything about Pix, probably the first thing you know is, but wasn't it mandated? You know, come on, how are you going to compare, you know, a mandate in Brazil to the American economy? And the U.S. is 40 times bigger when it comes to number of financial institutions. Right, so we're talking about an immense market if you compare it to Brazil, and also in the United States. Of course, like we're here in the United States, we have a liberal tradition, so we're not gonna expect a mandate from the Federal Reserve. So, okay, so how is this gonna happen without a mandate? So the thing is, the mandate helped. Of course it did. Like, I'm not gonna deny that. That's a fact. But it wasn't the mandate that made it spread out. Like, as the usage was organic, like it grew organically. Like, there was no mandate to make it mandatory for businesses to use it. And then, like in 2022, 96% of businesses in Brazil used Pix. So the mandate helped to have banks on board. But then, like, it grew to be the fastest growing instant payment service in the world. So even though like a number of transactions it's behind UPI, like India UPI, Pix ended up growing really, really fast. So in the US, I'd say that the first thing is, of course, like it's spreading the word. So showing that it actually exists, it's possible, and for what it's used for. Like what we feel, from the market here, like every time we talk to a financial institution, especially the smaller ones, right? They're not really wide aware yet of what it can be used for. And a really important thing that like not only there's a lot of like banks also talking about like, oh, but will it cannibalize my product? Like how will it impact my revenue? And of course we're going to see a difference, right, in revenue streams. But a really important form of retention, right, like keeping your client in and not having your client move to another bank is making sure that you're going to offer additional products, right? Like innovative products. And I don't know, I love this topic, so I kept on talking. So I'll stop for a bit.
No, I think it's great. I think the question around mandate is obviously an important one. However, to your point, I think some of the adoption that we saw in Pix really had to do with the merchant population picking it up. And I think some of the attributes that we have with both RTP and FedNow, the transparency, the instant access, obviously that creates a trust circle. And I think for the folks in Brazil, they felt that they could trust the system, which is why that they felt less reliant on actually leveraging cash and more ability to actually leverage the electronic payment capabilities.
Yep. No, for sure. Like that, the part of trust is definitely, I'd say, like the most important part. Of course, like when we talk about banks, I think naturally the population in Brazil in general would rely a lot on banks, would trust banks a lot. So if it's a solution that comes from the banks, you have kind of like a natural acceptance, because in the end of the day, they had to implement it, right? Like the Brazilian central bank specified how the solution would be, and like had technical documentation and had all the banks use that technical documentation and implement standards. But at the same point, the banks were the ones that got the solutions out there. The banks were the ones that got the solutions to the merchants, and not only like the banks, of course, but also the acquiring systems. And I have to say that also an important part to talk about, and I'm going to talk about that part of the trust. There was a big change in the Brazilian economy from a few years, like I'd say about 4 years till now. Mainly, the Brazilian central bank traditionally was quite conservative, let's say, because there is a lot, of course, of risk involved when you're going to start a new system, right? And even like you're going to in some way like change how things are in the market. And naturally, like before these changes came, the market was highly reliable on the big banks. So the big banks were the ones that would actually decide on how the market would be, right, and the new solutions that would be out there. But then the Brazilian central bank, with a president called Elon, which was a great president for the Brazilian central bank. He won a few like awards as one of the best central bank presidents in the world. And what he did was, okay, we trust the big banks, and we think they're great, but we need to bring some changes in, because if we don't bring some changes in, money, like the amount of credit you need to get to the merchant, to get to, let's say, the end of the chain, right, won't get there. So the central bank started creating an agenda with a lot of regulations, that would become new regulations that would change how the market was. So a few measures were created. So there were plans for, and that with Elon started, but then now there's another president, which is also great for the Brazilian Central Bank, which is called Roberto Campos. And he is also great because he continued the agenda that started back then. And so a few things were created and implemented. So PIX was one of them. And also there were projects for CBDC. There were projects for, and that DREX, right? It's another big project. Other less regulated financial institutions were created. So a financial institution called SEP and SCD. And also the federal government also wanted to kind of help also increase the number of financial institutions out there, and created another financial institution called ESC. And also the central bank created another category of institution, which is not a financial institution but can provide a few financial services. So it's kind of like a fintech. It's called payment institutions. So payment institutions can open an account for you, right, where you can have money in and a prepaid card, but it won't be authorized to offer you credit. But all these changes, and also they created collateral registries like FMIs, so financial market infrastructures that would register assets. And one really important one was the registering of card receivables. And I founded an FMI that registered card receivables at that time. And so all that was just a lot of different measures that the central bank was doing to okay, we got to make sure that the population has more liquidity, right? Has easier access to capital. Merchants have easier access to capital, and not only more access, but cheaper access, right? So cheaper credit. So all those measures. So it wasn't one thing, it wasn't only PIX. It was this big change in the Brazilian economy that wanted to bring efficiency into the whole financial industry. So that whole combination brought to what is happening right now. But when it comes to the United States, we have been seeing this change too. FedNow is the first rail in 40 years to be released, right? So this is a big change, and we the opportunity that we have in the United States is a lot wider. And even though it's pretty decentralized, because we're talking about a big number of financial institutions, and we're talking about a market where we're not going to have a mandate, but we have other organizations that can help with that. So when we talk about standardization, we have X9. When we're talking about creating best practices, we have the Faster Payments Council, right, that we're part of and that we have been working a lot, or Nacha, Smarter Payments Alliance, right? So we have big organizations that have been working a lot to help the industry improve. So over here, we're going to do it through the private sector, and it's going to happen. Maybe it's not going to be as fastly adopted as it was in Brazil, considering all the help, let's say, that the industry got from the Brazilian Central Bank. But we're going to see it happen here, but at the pace of really the private sector pushing it to happen, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. A lot of really great insights about what's happening in other countries. I think our listeners will be very interested to see how what we've seen in Brazil potentially come here into the U.S. So really appreciate your time today, Caroline.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.